Hey, welcome back to Compounding Quietly. When the market rallies hard, investors, holding something like SCHD, don't feel validated. They feel behind. That feeling is the real risk right now. But what is it actually telling you? The last few months have been genuinely disorienting for a lot of long-term investors. One of the sharpest equity rallies in recent memory played out, and if you were holding a dividend-focused position, you probably watched most of it from the sidelines. Not because your portfolio collapsed, but because the gap between what you held and what the broad index was doing kept quietly widening. That gap creates a very specific kind of doubt, not panic, doubt. The slow, persistent kind that makes you start second-guessing a strategy you spent years building. And here's what makes it particularly hard to manage. Doubt like this doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up as a quiet question, usually late at night. When you open your portfolio and run the comparison one more time, should I have just held the index? Is this strategy actually working? Am I staying loyal to a plan that's quietly costing me returns? Those questions feel urgent, but they're being driven by something very specific, not by your strategy breaking down, but by where the recent gains happen to come from. The most recent rally was heavily concentrated in technology, semiconductors, large-cap software, AI infrastructure plays. These drove the vast majority of index returns during this period. Dividend-heavy sectors, consumer staples, healthcare, energy, moved much more quietly. So if you were holding a dividend growth ETF, your portfolio reflected that quietness. And the follow-on question most investors ask is that a signal I should move? Here's what I'd offer instead of a yes or no. The real issue isn't what just happened. The real issue is whether you ever clearly defined what you were holding this position for before the market started testing that definition. Because most investors hold a strategy philosophically, without ever building the specific judgment criteria, they'd need to stay through the periods that challenge it. That's not a market problem. That's a clarity problem. And here's why that clarity problem matters so much right now. When conditions shift dramatically, when a rotation happens that challenges your returns, most investors respond by revising their strategy. They move toward what's currently working. They pull back from what isn't. And often, within a few months, the rotation reverses, and they find themselves watching a different kind of gap. The rotation wasn't the real problem. The absence of clear criteria was. The investors who held steady through the recent period of relative underperformance without significant anxiety weren't ignoring reality. They had already decided what success looks like, and the price comparison against a tech-heavy index simply wasn't part of that definition. Let's look at what a dividend growth ETF is actually designed to do, and why this moment makes that distinction so important. A dividend growth strategy doesn't screen for the highest yield available today. It screens for sustainability and growth. The companies inside a fund like SCHD are selected based on consistent dividend payment history, financial durability, and the demonstrated capacity to keep growing those payments over time. That selection process naturally weights toward businesses with steady, predictable cash flows, consumer staples, healthcare, industrials, energy. These are precisely the sectors that don't generate headlines. In a technology-led bull market, that's not a flaw in the design. It is the design. Think about what that actually means in practice. Imagine you've been holding a dividend growth ETF for 5 years. In year 2, a tech-driven bull market runs hard. The index surges. Your ETF trails by several percentage points. You open the comparison and the number doesn't feel good. But while you're focused on that number, something else is happening. Your quarterly dividend arrives. And if the fund has held up its design, that payment is slightly larger than it was the quarter before. Not dramatically, quietly. Then it happens again next quarter, and the quarter after that. That growth doesn't register the way an index surge does. It doesn't spike. It doesn't generate a headline. But compounded over years through reinvestment, through the slow, accumulating weight of those quarterly payments, it builds into something very different from what the short-term price comparison shows. Here's a way to make this concrete. Imagine a portfolio generating $5,000 in annual dividend income today. If that income grows at 7 to 8% per year, you're receiving roughly $10,000 annually from the same initial investment within 10 years. That number doesn't require the market to cooperate. It doesn't require technology to keep running. It requires the underlying companies, to keep doing what they were screened to do. That's a very different dependency than one built entirely on price appreciation, keeping pace with a growth-heavy index. Most investors understand compounding intellectually. Very few actually stay long enough to experience it, because most people exit during the periods that feel slow. And the early stages of dividend compounding are exactly that. Slow, quiet, easy to mistake for stagnation. Coming back to the central question, is SCHD still worth holding when the market environment shifts this dramatically? The honest answer is it depends entirely on what you are holding it for. If you are holding it for price appreciation that keeps pace with a tech-heavy index, recent performance genuinely challenges that expectation. And if that was your expectation, the more useful revision isn't to the ETF, it's to the expectation itself. If you are holding it because you want a growing income stream, you can eventually depend on that stream didn't pause when technology ran. The dividend didn't change because the index outperformed. The underlying business's capacity to generate cash and return it to shareholders doesn't reset with a sector rotation. What does change is the emotional context around the position. And emotional context is exactly where most long-term strategies fail. Not because the strategy was structurally wrong, because the investor never built the internal framework to hold through the periods that don't feel good. Portfolio value measured against an index fluctuates with every market move. Income coverage. How much of what you actually need your dividends to cover grows slowly, almost invisibly, but in a direction that market volatility can't easily reverse. One metric creates urgency, the other compounds. The investors who build durable long-term wealth in dividend strategies aren't necessarily the ones with the strongest conviction in a specific fund. They're the ones who define their success metric before the market had a chance to redefine it for them. So what does this mean for how you're thinking about your own position right now? It means the most useful question isn't, should I move to the index? It's, do I actually understand what this position is supposed to do for me over time? If the answer is clear, if you can say without hesitation, I am building a growing income stream, and I measure that stream, not the price comparison, then the recent environment is noise. Uncomfortable noise, but noise. If the answer isn't fully clear if you're holding a dividend growth ETF because it seems safe or because you like the concept without fully defining the expected outcome, that's worth sitting with, honestly. Not as a reason to exit, as a reason to build the clarity that makes it possible to stay. The clarity I'm talking about isn't complicated. It comes down to one honest question, answered before the market tests you. Am I building income or am I building price? If income, measure income growth. If price, make sure your benchmark and your investment vehicle actually match. Most of the doubt that long-term investors feel during periods of relative underperformance comes from exactly that mismatch. Holding an income strategy while grading it on a price scorecard. Market environments will keep rotating. Technology will lead, and then it won't. Defensives will lag, and then they won't. There will always be a period where what you hold underperforms something else. That's the cost of staying in something, designed for a longer timeline than the market is currently rewarding. The investors who compound quietly aren't the ones who never feel doubt. They're the ones who know, when the doubt arrives, exactly what they're holding and why they built it. Compounding quietly investing that gives you peace of mind. If this video helped, subscribe and leave a like. I hope this becomes a small source of strength in your investment journey. The content in this video is for general informational purposes only. All final decisions and responsibilities remain with the investor. Thank you for spending time with Compounding Quietly today.